saying that casually. I'm talking about the kind of loss that doesn't just drain your pockets, it strips away your identity, the kind that jolts you awake at 3 a.m. into a silence so heavy it feels like the universe itself has turned against you. The money is gone, the people are gone, the version of you that once believed life was fair is shattered. And yet here you are, still breathing, still observing, which means one thing, and one thing only. You weren't destroyed, you were chosen. You were. Most men shatter at the first encounter with real loss. They sink into excuses, into self-pity, into the quiet grave of a life half-lived. They call it bad luck, they call it betrayal, they call it fate. But the truth, the cold, ruthless, Machiavellian truth is this: the world does not destroy weak men, it exposes them. The fall didn't take anything from you that was ever truly yours. It burned away illusions, false loyalty, borrowed confidence, the identity built on things that were never meant to last. And what remains after all of that is reduced to ash. That is the real you, unfiltered, hardened, dangerous. Machiavelli understood something comfortable men will never accept. Power is never handed over, it is carved. Not from opportunity, not from privilege, not from perfect timing. It is carved out of the ruins of your worst moments, using nothing but discipline and ruthless clarity as your tools. He didn't write The Prince for men who lived easy lives. He wrote it for those who were exiled, humiliated, stripped of everything, and still chose to think like conquerors. That is the path you are stepping onto right now. This is not motivation. Motivation is for men who need to feel good before they act. This is architecture. A blueprint to build an empire from absolute zero, using the one thing loss can never take from you, your mind. Cold, calculated, unstoppable. So go ahead, drop it in the comments right now. Type, "I rise from ruin," because that is not just a phrase, it is the first brick of your empire. Now let us begin. Number 1. The grief they told you to hide is the weapon they were afraid you'd discover. Let me tell you something no one ever taught you in any room you've sat in. The pain you are carrying right now, the weight pressing on your chest like a stone at the bottom of a dark, frozen ocean, that is not your weakness. That is your raw, unrefined power. And the world has been hoping you never realize that. Every system around you, society, religion, even the people closest to you, have been whispering the same instruction into your ears since the day you were born. Hide the pain, suppress the darkness, smile while you bleed. Not because it was good for you, but because a man who makes peace with his darkness becomes impossible to control. Machiavelli knew that the most dangerous man in any kingdom was never the richest or the most praised. It was the man who had suffered fully and still refused to break, because that man no longer fears the threats that keep ordinary men obedient. You cannot intimidate someone who has already stood in the fire and learned its temperature. Your loss opened something inside you. Most men spend their entire lives running from that opening, numbing it, hiding it, filling it with distractions and noise. But the cold truth is this: that opening is not damage. That opening is the gateway, the place where a different kind of man begins to form, shaped in silence, sharpened by pain, loyal to nothing except his own relentless vision. The grief they told you to bury was never a burden. It was a briefing. A raw, unfiltered intelligence report about reality. Who betrayed you? Which illusions failed? What foundations were always weak? Most men cry over that report. The rare ones study it. They extract every lesson, every pattern, every brutal truth hidden inside the pain, and they turn it into a weapon. Right now, I want you to pause and drop something in the comments. Type, "My pain built my empire." Because that sentence is the beginning of a mindset that will separate you from every man still waiting to be rescued. Your grief was never the end of your story. It was the darkest, most powerful chapter, and it's time you finally learn how to read it correctly. Number 2. When the world buried you, it forgot that you were already a seed. Here is something they will never print in any textbook they hand you in school. Every empire in human history, every dynasty, every throne, every name carved into stone was built by a man who was first buried. Not symbolically, literally pushed into the cold, dark ground by circumstance, by betrayal, by the crushing weight of a world that had already written his ending. The people who celebrated your downfall made one fatal mistake. They assumed that burying you meant finishing you. They treated your collapse like it was the end of your story. But darkness and pressure are not tools of destruction for the right kind of man. They are tools of transformation. The same conditions that cause ordinary things to decay are the exact same conditions that create something extraordinary. Machiavelli was thrown into a dungeon, stripped of his titles, his influence, his entire political identity. His shoulders were dislocated. They tried to break his mind, and what did he do in that suffocating, freezing darkness? He thought, he observed, he wrote one of the most ruthless and calculated manuals of power the world has ever known. The dungeon did not silence him. It refined him into something unrecognizable. This is the kind of knowledge comfortable men will never reach. Adversity is not the enemy of greatness. It is the only entrance to it. There is no alternative door, no shortcut, no version of true lasting power that was not first tested under real pressure and suffering. The men living in comfort right now are not building empires. They are building dependencies, and dependencies collapse the moment circumstances shift. You were buried because you were the only one in that situation carrying something worth burying. Mediocrity is never a threat. Insignificance is never targeted. The ones who pushed you down, whether they realized it or not, sensed something within you that their own limitations could not allow to rise. Your burial was their silent confession that you were dangerous. So ask yourself this. While they were busy celebrating the dirt they threw over you, did they ever stop to think about what happens when a seed finally cracks open? Because that breaking is not destruction. That is the moment an empire starts to breathe. Drop it in the comments right now. Type "they buried me in fertile ground" and feel every word of it. Number 3. The man they humiliated becomes the most dangerous force alive. There is a certain type of man that every power structure throughout history has feared more than anything else. Not the wealthy man, not the praised man, not the one born into privilege and prepared for success. The man they fear most, the one who unsettles entire systems just by existing, is the man who was publicly humiliated and privately refused to accept it. Humiliation is designed to be the final blow. When the world strips you in public, takes your status, exposes your failures, laughs at your downfall, it is not only attacking your situation, it is attempting to execute you psychologically. The goal is to make you accept the verdict, to make you agree with your own collapse, to turn you into your own prison guard so they no longer have to watch the cage. But here is what those who design humiliation never consider. Sometimes the man inside that cage does not accept the verdict. He studies it. He sits in the silence, and instead of grieving over what he lost, he starts analyzing who moved against him, why they moved, what they revealed about themselves in the process, and exactly what structure of power they unknowingly exposed by showing their hand. Machiavelli once wrote that men should either be treated well or crushed completely, because a man who is wounded but not destroyed will always return with a level of precision that only personal suffering can create. This is not revenge in a shallow sense. This is something much colder, much more calculated. It is the rebuilding of a man who now understands the battlefield at its deepest level, because he has bled across every inch of it. The humiliation you endured gave you something no school, no mentor, no inherited wealth could ever give you. It gave you intelligence built in reality. You now recognize which smiles are weapons. You understand which loyalty comes with conditions. You see clearly how the game is played when everything is on the line, because you paid the price in the hardest currency that exists, your own dignity, temporarily surrendered. That word, temporarily, changes everything, because the man who rises after public humiliation does not just reclaim his dignity. He returns with a cold intensity in his eyes that silences the ones who once laughed. Drop it in the comments. Type "humiliation was my education" and understand that you just claimed one of the most expensive lessons on earth. Number 4. Silence is not weakness. It is the sharpest weapon ever forged. There is a discipline so ancient, so brutally effective, and so intentionally suppressed by a world addicted to noise that the men who master it become nearly untouchable. Not through aggression, not through dominance, not through any visible show of force. They become untouchable through the one practice weak men are incapable of sustaining: absolute weaponized silence. The moment most men experience loss, they start talking. They explain, they defend their image, they reach out, they justify, they perform their pain in public as if it will somehow reverse what has already happened. And in doing that, they hand every enemy, every observer, Every opportunist circling their downfall, the most valuable intelligence possible, a complete, unfiltered map of their wounds. Machiavelli understood that information is the real currency of power, not money, not status, not strength. And the man who speaks when he should remain silent is not just sharing information, he is giving away leverage. Every word you release at your lowest point is a brick removed from the fortress you should be quietly constructing in the dark while the world assumes you are finished. Study the most dangerous men in history, the conquerors, the builders of lasting power. They all shared one pattern their enemies consistently underestimated. They became completely still before they made their move. Like a predator that knows movement attracts attention, and attention destroys the advantage of surprise. Their silence was never absence, it was accumulation. Every quiet day was a day of invisible construction. Your silence right now is not surrender. It is not acceptance of what was done to you. It is the most aggressive strategic position available to a man who has nothing left. Because it costs your enemies nothing to observe a man who is loud, reactive, and predictable. But a man who goes completely silent after his fall becomes a variable. And variables make powerful people deeply uncomfortable. Let them believe your silence is grief. Let them mistake your stillness for defeat. Let them settle into the comfort of thinking you are broken. Comfort is the greatest vulnerability any opponent can have. And you are about to become the last thing a comfortable enemy ever expects. Drop it in the comments right now. Type, "My silence is my strategy," and let that be the final thing you announce before you begin building in the dark. Number 5. They didn't betray you. They revealed themselves and handed you a map. Let me give you the coldest perspective you will ever hear about the people who walked away when your foundation collapsed, the ones who disappeared when you needed them, the ones who whispered when you needed defense, the ones who smiled at your suffering while pretending concern. They didn't betray you, they promoted you, and you are going to thank them in the only language that matters: results. Betrayal only destroys the man who was operating on false assumptions. You built your circle on beliefs, on the comfort of thinking proximity meant loyalty, that shared history meant commitment, that laughter meant alignment. And your collapse didn't create their disloyalty, it exposed what was always there beneath the surface, waiting for the moment when protecting you became more costly than abandoning you. Machiavelli wrote that a man is never betrayed by his enemies, he is betrayed by his expectations. Enemies declare themselves through opposition. It is the ally who smiles while calculating your value that becomes the real threat. And the only way to gain that level of clarity, the only way to know exactly who stands with you, is to lose everything and watch who remains. Your collapse was the most precise loyalty test ever conducted. It required nothing from you except suffering, and in return, it gave you a crystal clear report on every person in your life. No manipulation, no years of observation required. One period of real adversity revealed in weeks what decades of comfort would have hidden forever. Now here is where it becomes truly dark, where the insight cuts the deepest. The map their betrayal gave you is not just a list of people to avoid, it is a behavioral blueprint. You now understand exactly how people calculate loyalty, what conditions trigger abandonment, and which self-interests override every promise made in easier times. That knowledge doesn't just protect you, it elevates you. It makes you the most strategically aware man in any room because you have seen behind the mask, and once you see it, you can never unsee it. Most men spend their entire lives trying to understand people. You paid once, in full, and the lesson is permanent. Drop it in the comments right now. Type, "Their betrayal was my blueprint," because you just acknowledged the most valuable gift your worst moment ever gave you. Number 6, rebuild, not to recover, but to become something the world has no category for. Most men who lose everything make one irreversible mistake when they start rebuilding. They rebuild backwards. They chase the life they lost. They try to recreate the same identity, the same status, the same relationships, the same version of success that already proved it could be destroyed. And by doing that, they guarantee they will lose it all again for the same reasons. You are not here to recover. Recovery is a medical concept. It means returning to a previous condition. But that previous condition was already flawed. It was already built on weak foundations that collapsed under pressure. The version of you that existed before operated within limits you didn't even recognize, limits that your collapse has now made permanently visible. Returning to that is not success, it is chosen blindness. Machiavelli understood that a prince who regains his throne by simply reversing his losses will always remain vulnerable because he rebuilt on the same ground, with the same weaknesses, surrounded by the same forces that caused his fall. The prince who becomes untouchable is the one who rises from collapse with a completely different structure, new foundations, new alliances, new systems designed specifically to survive the exact pressures that once destroyed him. This is where dark psychology meets cold strategy in its most powerful form. You must not just rebuild, you must redesign. Rebuild your finances with systems that cannot be attacked the same way. Rebuild your relationships with standards so strict that conditional loyalty cannot pass through. Rebuild your identity from within, not from validation, but from an internal code so strong it does not require an audience to exist. The goal is not to become successful again. The goal is to become something the world has never seen in you before, something so different from the man who fell that those who watched your collapse cannot recognize what stands before them now. That moment, that exact moment when confusion fills their eyes, is when you know the transformation is complete, because you didn't return, you didn't recover, you evolved into something colder, sharper, more structurally sound, something that makes your past collapse look less like a tragedy and more like a necessary demolition to clear space for what was always meant to be built. Drop it in the comments right now. Type, "I don't recover, I evolve," and understand that you just defined the difference between men who rise once and men who become permanently unstoppable. Number 7, the empire inside your mind must be conquered before any empire outside will ever obey you. Every external empire that has ever fallen in history, every dynasty reduced to dust, every fortune erased, every kingdom consumed by time, shared the same origin of destruction. Not external enemies, not economic failure, not betrayal. The decay always began in the same place, inside the mind of the man who built it. And that is where your war must begin. The most dangerous battlefield you will ever face has no map. It has no terrain, no weather, no distance to cross. It exists entirely within the space between your ears. And it is there that the most advanced, most relentless, most personally calibrated enemy you will ever face has been operating against you since the moment you were old enough to question yourself. That enemy is not depression. It is not fear in its simplest form. It is something far darker and far more calculated. It is the internalized voice of every person who ever placed limits on you, the parent who called you unrealistic, the system that labeled you as average, the failure you replayed so many times it began to feel like destiny. These are not just memories, they are occupying forces, and they must be removed with the same cold precision you would use against any external threat. Machiavelli wrote that the first way to judge a ruler's intelligence is by the company he keeps. But before that, before any external evaluation matters, a man must conquer the voices within him that insist he was never meant to rule anything at all. Because a man who has full control over his own mind governs a territory that no outside force can ever fully invade, occupy, or destroy. This is the forbidden knowledge that separates those who build temporary empires from those who build lasting ones. The temporary builder chases discipline when motivation is high and abandons it the moment that feeling fades. The permanent builder does something far more ruthless. He goes deep into his own psychology, identifies every self-sabotaging pattern, every inherited limitation, every comfortable lie he tells himself in the quiet of night, and eliminates them without hesitation. Your mind is not your sanctuary yet. Right now, it is contested ground, part vision, part doubt, part ambition, part inherited fear. And the real work of building an empire, the invisible work that happens long before any external result appears, is the slow, brutal, relentless process of clearing that territory until only clarity, discipline, and an unshakable sense of purpose remain. Drop it in the comments right now. Type "My mind is my first empire," because the man who conquers himself first can never be conquered by anything outside of him. Number 8. Power never announces itself. It simply causes everything around it to submit. There is a fundamental misunderstanding about power that keeps average men stuck exactly where they are. They believe power is loud. They think it shows itself through aggression, through dominance displays, through performing strength in front of an audience. So they spend their lives posturing, proving, demanding recognition, while the truly powerful men in the same room remain completely still and say very little. Real power, the kind that shifts environments, changes atmospheres, and makes even calculated men instinctively adjust their behavior in your presence, is never performed. It is radiated, and it radiates not from what you say or how loudly you say it, but from the depth of what you have endured, the clarity of your decisions, and the silent certainty that you operate from a place so internally solid that external approval no longer matters at all. Machiavelli understood that the prince who feels the need to remind others of his power has already started losing it. True authority works through presence, not proclamation. It operates through the quiet, controlled signal of a man who has made irreversible decisions about who he is and where he is going. Decisions so deeply embedded in how he moves, how he waits, how he observes, that they become visible without a single word being spoken. This is where dark psychology becomes your most refined weapon. The man rebuilding from nothing must resist every urge to announce his comeback, because announcing is seeking validation. And seeking validation is the most visible weakness to those who understand power. Every time you perform your rise, you are asking others to confirm it, and that dependence becomes a chain, no matter how strong you appear. Instead, move in silence, so complete and with direction so clear that your results become the only statement needed. Let your wealth speak without explanation. Let your network speak without introduction. Let the precision of your actions, the sharpness of your execution, and the consistency of your discipline build a reputation so undeniable that it enters rooms before you and stays long after you leave, because that is the final, darkest truth about power that most men never understand. It is not something you chase, demand, or perform your way into. It is something you become, quietly, ruthlessly, completely, and the world has no defense against a man who has mastered that at the deepest level. Drop it in the comments right now. Type, "I don't chase power, I become it," and understand that you just defined the mindset that separates those who reach greatness from those who only watch it from a distance. Number 9. The coldest men alive feel everything and choose to be controlled by nothing. Here is the piece of knowledge that will completely redefine how you understand emotional control. The coldest, most strategically dangerous men to ever exist were never emotionless. They were never numb, never empty, never disconnected. They felt everything, every betrayal at its full depth, every loss at its full weight, every humiliation at its raw intensity, and then they made one irreversible decision: to never let what they felt dictate what they did. This distinction changes everything, because suppressing emotion is not the same as mastering it. The man who suppresses is still controlled. He is simply controlled by the effort of holding it down rather than by the emotion itself. He is constantly running an exhausting internal process that drains the exact focus and clarity he needs for precise, strategic thinking. Suppression is not discipline, it is delayed explosion. Emotional mastery is something entirely different and far more powerful. It is the ability to fully feel every experience, sit inside it with complete awareness, extract every lesson it carries, and then consciously decide not to let it influence your actions. Not because it is meaningless, but because you have decided that your response will always be guided by strategy, never by feeling. Machiavelli never promoted men without emotion. He promoted men who had such control over their internal world that emotion became information, not instruction. Anger becomes a signal of where your boundaries were crossed. Grief becomes insight into what you truly valued. Fear becomes a precise indicator of where preparation is needed. None of these are weaknesses. They are tools in the hands of a disciplined man who can observe them without being consumed by them. The world will always try to use your emotions as entry points, as vulnerabilities through which your behavior can be influenced, your decisions can be weakened, and your power can slowly be drained. Every person who has ever intentionally provoked you, publicly embarrassed you, or created chaos in your life was acting on one core assumption: that your emotional reaction was automatic and therefore predictable. And predictable men are controllable men. The moment you develop the ability to absorb the full force of provocation, to feel it completely, recognize it internally with total honesty, and then respond not from the wound but from strategy, you become something the architects of manipulation have no framework to deal with, because their entire system was built on your reactivity. And a man who has eliminated reactivity with precision is not just hard to manipulate, he is practically immune. Drop it in the comments right now. Type "I feel everything, I'm moved by nothing," because that statement is not ego, it is the operating system of every man who has ever become truly and permanently untouchable. Number 10. The man who conquers himself inherits everything the world once denied him. You've reached the end of this video, but understand this clearly. This is not an ending. Endings belong to stories that are complete. What you have just taken in is not a story. It is an operating system. A cold, precise, permanently installed architecture of thought that will now operate beneath every decision, every silence, every calculated action you take from this point forward. The only question that matters now is whether you are ready to actually live it. Because here is the darkest truth in everything we have discussed. Knowledge without execution is the most advanced form of self-betrayal that exists. There are men who have studied every philosophy, analyzed every conqueror, memorized every principle of power and strategy, and still lived ordinary lives, still broke under pressure, still surrendered their potential to comfort and hesitation. Information without application is not wisdom. It is expensive distraction. The man who conquers himself, who fights the internal war with the same cold precision that Machiavelli reserved for external enemies, who dismantles every inherited limitation, every self-sabotaging pattern, every comfortable lie that makes mediocrity feel acceptable. That man does not just build an empire, he becomes one, a self-contained, self-sustaining, mentally fortified sovereign force that requires no validation to stand strong. Machiavelli's deepest and most forbidden insight was never just about politics. It was never only about princes, kingdoms, or external power. At its core, it was this: the man who wins the war within himself first moves through the world as if it was built for him. Not because the world becomes easier, but because he becomes stronger than anything the world can create to break him. You entered this video having lost something, maybe everything, but you leave it carrying something that cannot be taken, cannot be taxed, cannot be betrayed, cannot be stripped away by any loss, any enemy, any twist of fate or cruelty or circumstance. You leave with the cold, unshakable awareness of what you are capable of becoming when you stop grieving what is gone and start designing what has never existed before. Drop it in the comments one last time. Type "I survived myself, now I build my empire," because that is not just a line for this video. That is the moment a man stops being shaped by his circumstances and becomes the force that shapes them. This is Machiavellian galaxy. If this video awakened something real inside you, something cold, something aware, something that has been waiting for this kind of truth, then hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because what you've seen today is only the beginning of what this channel is built to deliver. The men who stay will not remain the same, and that is exactly the point.